Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode, we're going to have another gaming roundtable. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Kier.
I'm Haley.
And I'm Jay from Gallifrey Public Radio,
A podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network.
just like the one you're listening to right now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual.
Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
And get ready, because geekiness begins in 3,
2,
1.
Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. Couple quick announcements. First off, our Patreon stuff continues, and Lacey's Dread game will be posted this week, I do believe, if everything goes right. She's on vacation, so she's gonna.
James just gave me a hard deadline.
She's gonna be on vacation this week, so it should.
I've already
be no
got the
problem.
character surveys up, so I just have to type up all the plot in a way that makes some sort of logical sense to y'all and get them posted. So
Right
we'll see
on.
how that goes.
In addition to that, we played this weekend and talked with Kurt, and he is going to post a bunch of his custom maps. It sounds like
Kurt is actually a pretty good cartographer.
Yeah.
I really enjoy his maps.
They're all hand drawn. They're very large, so he said he's going to try and scan them as a large file so that we can post them on there, and then you guys can check those out and use them for whatever you want.
He said some techie words. I feel confident in his
Right.
ability to get it done. I don't know.
I'm willing to bet that we'll probably end up with the NPCs that are connected to that world scanned and put in as well, probably as a PDF or whatever. So if you're interested in that and you just want some inspiration or even want to use it to run your own game with,
Or just marvel at the abundance of detail that Kurt puts into his games.
true story. It's been a labor
I still find it astounding.
of love. Yeah, it is. It is true. It is very true.
I'm looking at the empty chair over there like Kurt is here as we're discussing this.
No, he's
Aw,
gone.
Kurt.
But he did come by and we did game
Yeah.
the other day. So
And
that's
we're
good.
going to record an episode with Kurt next week, or
Yes.
this coming weekend,
Right.
actually. So
And
look
we've-
forward to that.
Yep. In addition to that, we've mentioned on here several times about some mobile recording at your, hope maybe at some of your local gaming stores. That's going to take place, it looks like in January will be our first one.
Hopefully, we'll be able to record one at our local gaming store
Yes.
because they're building a new one.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a new gaming store coming to Terre Haute, and we're going to get with them about recording. And if they open before January, then we are going to try and squeeze it in where we will record there, but we're still working that out. And we actually have a call to help, actually, from all of you guys. We are going to be heading down to the Pompano Beach, Florida area in the first week of December. And we were curious if any of you guys live down that way, if you know of any good gaming stores, because we like to check out gaming stores when we travel and support them and pick up a few things that we may not be able to find in our own local area. So if you live in the Pompano Beach, Fort Lauderdale area, or know someone who does, or know gaming stores there, or have lived there, or vacationed there and went to the local gaming stores there. If there's any reason you have been in that area and been to a gaming store and had a good time, let us know. Hit us up on Twitter or on Facebook, or you can email me, James at Just One More Fix. All the different places you can find us and let us know, because we like to get out there and support some gaming stores and check things out.
We're happy to know about other general geekery in the area, too.
That's
if you
true as
don't
well.
have a gaming store, but you have an awesome comic shop, I'm still happy to check that out.
Very true, very true. All right, right on. I think that does it for the announcements, so we're going to jump into this one. So I think we called this Frustration at Your Gaming Store. So why don't you, this was kind of your idea a little bit, so why don't you set this one up, Lacey?
Okay, so this episode is all about my pet peeves. And I don't know if the local gaming store is necessarily where it is, because for us, like I said, we don't really have one.
Right.
But we go to the Gen Con every year, and I kind of tootle around on Kickstarter and some of the RPG forums and stuff like that. And so what is bothering me is just this oversaturation of certain themes to the point where other like good original ideas I feel like are getting buried a little bit, and it really irritates me. So the one most recently that kind of got me set off was Stranger Things.
Mm-hmm.
I love the TV show. I thought it was fantastic. And I backed Tales from the Loop on Kickstarter. But now all of a sudden, everybody out there wants to write their own 1980s setting RPG adventure or publish their own RPG adventure or what have you. And I just don't care. I don't I don't want anything to do with it. Like, I like the show, but I don't need to be hit in the face with 16 of the exact same idea.
Okay.
So that's our topic for today.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I agree with you somewhat, but in some ways I disagree. So you mentioned Stranger Things. Let's just start there. Okay. When you talk about Stranger Things, it's a very clear setting, right? You have the Goonies style ensemble cast of kids that go out and have an adventure and do something, right?
Right.
And I think you can turn the volume on the horror up or down on that, or the adventure up or down. But that fundamentally, that's the game, right? It's ensemble cast of kids that go out and have adventures. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair.
Now, I agree with you in that there's not, how should I say this? That's a pretty straightforward genre, right? You've got your time period. It's 80s, because if you get into the more modern time, it starts to lose some of its appeal because cell phones and all that kind of stuff, right?
Well, the parenting style is different,
right? So it's just
just drastically changes the feel of the world for children.
So when you've got this very specific time period, right, and that kind of limits you in a way, and then you have the characters of this ensemble cast of children out the gate, and that limits you kind of a way, in its own kind of way, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that you're on the nose with that, because it's a very specific world that you're playing in right there, right? And it's hard to have an original storyline in that, like, it's very limited because you're so hemmed in about what that world is. Mm-hmm. And I 100% agree with you in that sense, because it is very limiting. But in some other settings, I'm not sure that I do, because it's broader. I think the more specific you make your world and your setting, the easier it is to have less and less difference between those style of games, right? Mm-hmm. And I say this knowing full well that we played Tales from the Loop and thoroughly enjoyed it and had a great time. And we've used Fate.
It was like at the beginning of that. And so if you're going to be an RPG that's emulating something that's common in pop culture, you probably better be the first one, or you better be damn good at what you're selling.
Right, you better be first or really good.
Yeah. And so it's just, it's not so much the annoyance that we're replicating it, it's the annoyance that we're replicating it 12 to 15 times. Mm-hmm. And like, if you want to take that as a springboard to do something else, but don't sell me the Demogorgon as your main bad guy in the story, because I've seen that.
Right.
I want something else.
Well, I think the same thing happened with zombies in a way, because it was zombie everything. Zombies were popular before, but then when The Walking Dead first really exploded, whatever it was, 10 years ago now, something like that, like, it was cool, and I really enjoyed it, and then it just sort of creeped into everything.
Right.
And I feel like the same thing happened with vampires in the early 2000s
when
and
Twilight
the 90s.
came out.
But even before that, with Interview with the Vampire and all the Anne Rice stuff, it kind of, the success of Vampire the Masquerade.
But I don't think it was ever as mainstream with that, because the number of people reading books is just not as many as the number of people watching movies. Like, if we're being perfectly honest.
That's true.
I mean, maybe when Interview with the Vampire came out, but that was one movie, and it didn't have the same effect as like the Twilight series. And I guess that started as books too.
Right, but the movies really blew it wide open. But what about Harry Potter? Harry Potter's a good example, and there are several sort of kid magician or wizard RPGs that are out there. Do you feel the same way about that?
Not quite as much, because it's not as narrow of a genre. When you're talking about kids using magic, that's a fairly broad environment. Now, when you narrow it down to kids using magic at a school, then it gets a little tighter, and it depends on how tight you set the constrictions. But when you're talking about a gang of kids in the 1980s, like, that's a pretty narrow window.
Right.
And I think that's maybe why. And then when you add on extra things like D&D related, then I'm really just like, ugh.
So
every level of detail you add that's similar just constricts it farther down and makes it less original.
So let me ask you this then, and this, I don't know that this directly relates, or maybe it runs parallel to it. Using the Stranger Things analogy, right? Because it is the most recent and the most popular, right now, of these things. you're talking about how you have these things, the 80s and these ensemble cast of kids and all that kind of stuff, right? And how it calls back to things that you know, like you know.
It's nostalgia.
Right. But even outside of that, like you're talking about like the Demigorgon and all the pieces that are there, right? But those are like those themes that you're talking about, those are tropes and those are things that we want to see in games. And we want to see those same things in stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that you are frustrated with that as opposed to being frustrated with seeing the same tropes over and over again in other things?
Well, you can see the same tropes over and over again in other things as long as the theme is different, right? So you can see the hero's journey, but now I see it in the sci-fi setting with Luke Skywalker. Now I see it in a completely different wizard setting with Harry Potter. Like there are drastically different feelings to those things, even though it is the same plot points.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the story, it's the costume that it's wearing.
Right.
So to speak. Okay.
And then you can have the exact same set of costuming and drastically different themes, which is like Star Wars and Spaceballs.
Right.
So there you have the same setting, practically even the same characters, but most certainly not the same story.
That's not that may be a bad example because one is a parody of the other.
Okay, but I mean,
I see what you're
still,
going for.
comedy
Right.
versus something that is fantasy and very serious.
So let me ask you, and this isn't, and I guess we should have probably prefaced this to say, we're not trying to poo-poo all of people's games because I think more games, we would both agree that more games is better, right?
More good games is better.
But if you have a million games being produced, right, that's going to mean that there are going to be more good games, though.
It is, but I feel sort of the same way about that as I feel about like trying to find something to watch on Netflix. Like the more time I have to spend finding something good or like watching the first 20 minutes of something to realize that it sucks, that's less time that I'm playing
Right.
really good games. And it's frustrating. I don't know what the answer is to solve that problem, really.
Right.
I mean, because everybody can make a game. And I think it's great that everybody can make a game. And like the fact that there's electronic drive-through RPG and stuff makes it so much easier for that to be a reality for people. And maybe publishing companies can be a little exclusive, and it's like everything else in this world, it's who you know to get your foot in the door to be able to make things a reality for getting
Right.
your stuff out there. And I think it's gotten easier as it's gone on, and that's great. You get 5,000 new things, but you get the same percentage of good stuff. And so some of the good stuff gets a little bit difficult to find sometimes.
So when a new, like you said, you've either got to be first or you've got to be really good, right? So is it because...
But even then, even if you're really good, if you're the 15th person to do that thing, am I even going to bother to pick up your RPG and look at it?
Well, okay. And I will answer that question, and I will say yes, because, and let me give you an example.
Okay.
And I've been playing essentially Dungeons and Dragons since, roughly speaking, like 89. Okay.
Okay.
Between 89 and 90, right? And so that's
You're so old.
that's true. But so I've been playing fantasy games, fantasy style role play games, right? So I played,
Right.
started with second edition, went back to first edition. So there's two different games, right? Then third edition came out. Never really dabbled in fourth, right? But I played also lots of other variations of fantasy games. We played used the World of Darkness system to play fantasy style games because we liked World of Darkness because it didn't have.
That's not really a fantasy setting.
But
though.
no, we weren't playing in World of Darkness. We
Oh,
used
okay.
the World of Darkness system to play in a fantasy style game.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then I would even say that in the terms that we used World of Darkness Dark Ages to play more or less something along the lines of a Game of Thrones game.
But
you
with
know-
vampires.
But it's not high fantasy in that everybody's running around shooting fireballs and riding dragons, but it's fantasy in the sense that it's a fantastical universe, it's Dark Ages, that kind of stuff. So fundamentally, do you know what I mean? Okay, that's a whole nother discussion, but it was largely a low fantasy style world, or you know what I mean?
It was a low magic world.
Okay.
Maybe. Although if you have Tremere, I mean, that's arguable.
Well, no. But like in the games that we were playing, though, we didn't involve the supernatural directly in that way. Like if there were vampires, there wasn't a clan associated with them. It was just they're vampires and they had powers and we were running for our lives and whatever. Or werewolves, actually. I don't think we involved any vampires. But it was a low fantasy style, medieval-ish game, right?
It's not a fantasy world, though.
How is it not a fantasy world?
Because fantasy is very like innately like good and evil. There's no gray area in fantasy. That's why it's largely boring.
You realize there's the humanity tracker that tracked your descent to evil, right?
Right, but it's a personal evolution. It's not like I'm good and this person is bad. It's a very muddled gray argument.
What about our Inquisitors game? It was very clearly black and white morality in that one. You're either mortal and on the side of the righteous, or you are evil and bad and wicked and not. That's clearly black and white morality in that one.
Yeah, but...
Okay, either way, we're kind of getting off track. But all I'm saying is,
fantasy,
is that I played several different systems and different kinds of game that were all largely in the fantasy wheelhouse, right? With the fantasy ranging from low fantasy being something similar to that of Game of Thrones to a slightly modified alternate history.
Game of Thrones season 1.
Yeah, all the way up to and including full-on Forgotten Realms, Elminster, crazy fireballs, the Tarrasque running around and all that kind of craziness, right? And to be honest, I am even right now, very tired of fantasy games. Mm-hmm. They're just not, generally speaking, it's not what I would choose to play. Not that I can't have fun in them, but if I make a choice and I have choice between two things, the fantasy one is generally not the one I choose.
I find it's almost like a refreshing thing to visit in a way that, like, I've occasionally like to watch cartoons. Mm-hmm. You can just stare at it and not really think too much. Right. And play that game. But it's not normally what you're going to want to do.
Now, where I'm coming back to your answer now, to kind of finally bring it back around, is Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Right.
And I love that game.
I felt like I knew that was where you were going to go with that.
But I mean, I really like that game. Now, and I will say, it does a couple things that I enjoy. One, it calls back to a very D&D feel. First, second edition, that kind of old school feel to it that I really enjoy.
You could say it's old school Revolution.
There you go. But I also, the more important thing that it does, though, is it's the quality of the product that they're putting out.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm rolling a D20 and shooting fireballs or magic missiles or whatever. It has to do with the quality of the adventures that they put out and how they've streamlined the mechanics.
Well, yeah, the simplicity for me is what really like seals the deal as far as system goes, because like we talked to somebody, we were part of this like gaming forum group or whatever, and somebody posted the other day what's your favorite system for running fantasy D&D style games.
Right.
And it's most definitely not any Dungeons and Dragons system, because I will play in them all day for you, sure, because the level of thought that I have to put into it is not that much greater, really,
right,
from the PC perspective. But as a GM, there's nothing that irritates me more than having to have 3 different books open and having to have 8 different bookmarks in each book in order to be able to flip back and forth to the charts that I need to figure out how to run this game for you. It's insanity.
But that's where I'm saying, though, that I think that clearly Lamentations wasn't first, right? Mm-hmm. Not even close. But they are really good, and that's what has drawn me to them. So I think fantasy is the easiest example of it, because that's the, broadly speaking, like the OG of gaming, right? Is Dungeons and Dragons in the fantasy world, right? And that is one that I have gone to over and over again in it, and then moved away from, because like you said, I had the same feeling that you're talking about now. But then with Lamentations coming out, I was drawn back into it. But I feel like that is the same with other games. And
I think, like, if you're talking about the solution to this problem, right? So I'll give you an example. So we're walking through a convention, and you're walking through the art section, and you're like, wow, that is a really beautiful picture of a dragon, but it's still just another dragon. Mm-hmm. And look, there's another really beautiful picture of a dragon. Like, the artist is fantastic. Like, they're doing a brilliant rendition, but it's still just a dragon, right? And then you get to one like, oh, but like, here's a dragon, and in the background there's like a World War II airplane. Whoa, what's going on there? Like, that's a really freaking awesome dragon, but look what else you did over there. there's some thought happening there about what else is going on with this freaking dragon. So, like, if you want to use a dragon, cool, use a dragon. Give me something else. Do something that's you. Do something different. Add something that's not just another freaking dragon. Does that make sense, or did I just lose you in my little?
No, I think I see what you're saying, but I think the analogy is, I don't know, it's a little weird because
I mean, you're talking about fantasy,
I couldn't be any less interested in a game that is dragons and World War II fighter planes. Maybe I don't know.
But would you be more interested in that than a game that's just more dragons?
I don't know.
Like, if all you see is dragons.
Maybe I'm being a little cynical, but I don't know. I may not be. I don't know. It just depends on. Maybe.
I mean, like in reality, obviously, if you're running a game, like the dragon's just going to destroy the plane because it can breathe freaking fire.
It's a dragon.
But we're talking about art now.
Okay,
and I've moved on.
Well, no, but I think what you're talking about is.
I don't want to see people regurgitate the same idea. I want to see them take a good idea and a good story, and I want to see them build on it and add something that is uniquely theirs to that perspective. And I think that's how you get more good stuff. Like, don't just retell me the same story.
Let me ask you this. This might tie back into something that we talked when we talked with Kyle Chenier and James Radji about the Lamentations products. Their creative process behind that line allows for the person producing it to leave very definite pieces of themselves in there and things that they like and that they're passionate about.
Right.
And I think whenever you produce something, and this is true of anything, whether it's a work of art or an RPG or stuff that you do in your own personal and professional life, right? When I'm doing any task that I find interesting and inspired, and I'm inspired by it, I do better at it. I do a better job of it, right?
We've talked about that in just running games in general.
Uh-huh.
The game that I want to be a character in is the game that you're excited to run.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
exactly.
the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You know, setting whatever. If you are visibly excited about running this game for me, then I'm going to be excited to be a part of it because it's going to be awesome because you're giving 100% of what you have because you are invested in this thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at there. I think you just did a much better point of getting right to it, is that when you're excited and inspired by something, even if you're the content creator, like the initial creator of the RPG, or you're the content creator at your individual table, if you're excited about it and you are able to put yourself into it and be inspired to do it, you produce a better end product, right?
But I guess maybe that's not enough because people are obviously excited about Stranger Things enough to just like regurgitate exactly what's happening in that story.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's like you said, it's.
But you can't just be excited about it. You have to be excited about it enough to like try and emulate it in a way that's creative.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm getting my point across, but it's not enough to be excited about it and then try and tell the exact same story. You have to be excited about it and then take it and evolve it into something else.
Well, I think it's the problem you fall into when you talk about like Stranger Things being a very specific genre, right? So you're either playing The Goonies or you're playing Stranger Things, and there's only so many stories that you can tell.
Why do you keep referencing The Goonies? Is it just because Sean Astin is in the story?
No. But it's because it's that 80s adventure story. It's like there are a lot of parallels to draw between Stranger Things and The Goonies because it's 80s adventure. It's just one is darker than the other.
Unsupervised children succeeding at a task that they should never, ever have been involved in, like DCFS should be notified immediately.
All I'm trying to say, though, is that there are only so many stories that you can tell with that before it starts to become kind of redundant and tired.
Right, but you're telling the same story in The Goonies that you're telling in Stranger Things, and I am not bored by either of those stories.
You're right, but what I'm saying,
if you gave me Goonies and then you gave me Stranger Things.
What I'm saying, though, is that in terms of when you're running that game or you're sitting down to play the game,
right?
There's not the same amount of longevity in that kind of a game as there is in like a World of Darkness game, like a Vampire the Masquerade game, because the parameters that you set up around the game and what it's capable of and the stories you're going to tell are much narrower than what a World of Darkness game is. A World of Darkness game is very big and very broad and wide, whereas with this style of 80s childhood adventure, it's very narrow in what you can do. And part of that is limited because you're children, and part of it is limited because of the genre and the time period and all that kind of stuff. There's just not as many stories to tell, so I feel like it runs out faster. So when you have something that runs out faster, when those storylines run out faster, I feel like the games that you can produce around that are less than that.
So do you think that is the same for running in any established intellectual property? Because there are a ton of those. You know, there's Serenity RPG. There's a
Right.
Doctor Who RPG. There's the One Ring, Lord of the Rings RPG. And I don't know that you necessarily
Well-
have the same limitation in that way, but that's
This
also very specific.
Yeah, this is something I found interesting when you mentioned when I asked you about like the Harry Potter thing, right? And you said that they're childhood wizards or whatever. You don't find that as limiting as you do like this 80s fiction.
Well, I do if you're playing only child wizards inside a wizarding school.
Mm-hmm.
If you go broader than that, and now maybe like your adult wizards out in the world, and it's using the same world, but it's
So
a different
progression.
like the difference between Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts,
Uh-huh.
right? It's a different story. It's the same world, but it's a different story. But at the same time, I'm also the nerd
Stop,
that will
stop, stop,
say
hang
I
on.
will never play in a Star Wars RPG,
Hang on. But
right?
but I think you said something very interesting there. Is that you talked about Fantastic Beasts, right? And that's a very different story than the Harry Potter story, right? But that world is almost also much bigger. When you're talking about in terms of something like Stranger Things or the Goonies, their world is much smaller. It's
Yeah.
about this town and all that happens in this town. And is it the fact that the world is smaller, so there's not as much access to things? And do you think we've gone too far off topic? Now we're talking about like setting stuff almost.
Well, I don't think it's different because we're talking about the established IP, which I think is an important distinction to make because is Stranger Things just a different intellectual property that we're exploring?
Okay.
How is that different than all these other RPGs that we see? What is it about it specifically that annoys me versus all these
Right.
things that are currently in existence? But then again, there's one major Lord of the Rings RPG, right? One Ring. That's
Right.
the major one. I think there's a second one now. I feel like, but
I know,
but it's not
been
like
licensed to
there's
different people
there's
over
not
time, but-
several of them. There's
Yeah.
not more than a handful. It's
But-
this is one thing. But I think probably the next best example of this is Cthulhu
Uh-huh.
because sometime in the last decade, all of a sudden we saw just an explosion of Cthulhu RPGs, Cthulhu products. Cthulhu was on freaking everything. Stuffed animal plushie Cthulhu's and Cthulhu's on bibs and children's
Right.
books about Cthulhu and I was just like, okay, it was like the zombie thing, right? Like I'm done. Thanks, guys.
Talking about the Cthulhu thing, right? I like Call of Cthulhu as an RPG. I'm not a fan of the mechanics of it because I don't like percentile dice systems, okay? But what Call of Cthulhu did to the RPG space, I really, really like. I like mystery investigation games and all this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Now, I think Trail of Cthulhu is like the refined down perfection of what what Call of Cthulhu was trying to do, but
Okay, give me a
Trail.
moment to be like ignorant in RPG process. Are they produced by the same company?
no, so Call of Cthulhu is very, very early on. It's an old game, right? First edition Call of Cthulhu is very old, and it was produced by Chaosium, okay?
Okay.
Revolutionary game, changes everything, because at that point, it's basically, when that comes out, it's Traveler, D&D, and then Call of Cthulhu, okay?
Right. So sci-fi, fantasy, and nothing for the rest of us to play.
Right. But like Call of Cthulhu introduces this idea of the idea that your characters are going to die, go crazy, or go missing, and the investigation process and not
But they're not going to die in character creation. So
Right.
that's
That's
the
true.
big distinction.
but like unlike in D&D, you're not just going to punch your way out of a problem because it's Cthulhu, it's
Right.
like this
you're very much mortal
yeah,
as opposed to being some sort of heroic entity.
Exactly. So it changed that space a whole lot, and it introduced a lot of new ideas and concepts. So it's very, very cool and influential. But mechanically, I don't care for the way the percentile systems work. But it's very early on in the process. Things have changed and developed a whole lot better.
Right.
Now, the way that Trail of Cthulhu works, I think, is just the perfect way to make an investigation game. That the Gumshoe system is just amazing if that's what you want to do. There's nothing better out there than that, in my opinion. Okay, and there's not really a tremendous amount of Cthulhu games out there that are successful. Well, maybe not. I mean, successful and big. Do you know what I'm saying? Because like it's kind of a narrow
For
market.
those of you that can't tell, I was giving James my skeptical face when he said that statement.
Well, in terms of RPGs, there's lots of Cthulhu stuff out there. Obviously, I mean it's everywhere, right? But like it's Delta Green, Trail of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu, and then there's some other smaller ones that are derivative off of that. But fundamentally, that's it. And Delta Green is basically Call of Cthulhu, just in a more modern time period. Still like
Delta Green always struck me as more like if you sort of fuse Cthulhu and X-Files together.
well, yeah, in a way. You know,
I don't know exactly how it's different, but it feels different than...
well, it's a much more updated time period and whatnot, you know, so it changes things quite a bit. But I do agree with you that, like, in terms of like stories to read and books, the Cthulhu thing I have a hard time with because there's just so much. It's so saturated, right? And well, I mean, if I'm going to be honest, I'm a little biased. I don't find Cthulhu as interesting as I do Hastur, and the whole Yellow Sign and Chambers thing I find to be more interesting, which is why I'm excited to see the Yellow Sign RPG come out and all that.
Right.
But that's a great example of something where they weren't first, but man, were they good. They really refined it down and did something amazing with it. And I know there's loads of Call of Cthulhu products and stuff like that and various spin-offs or whatever, but part of me thinks that, like, I've mentioned before that I think we may have reached peak game, right? There's so many RPGs coming out, and board games is even more so because there's, like, if you look at what gets released every month on BoardGameGeek.com, you can't even keep up with it anymore. You know, there's so much. But I do think that as more stuff comes out, you're still going to have, I think, the same percentage of things that come out that aren't as good, right?
Right.
They're just not as refined. They're not in your vein or whatever. But if you have 100 games coming out a month as opposed to 10, then chances are, instead of having one that you like, now there's 10 that you like.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's easy to keep track of 5% of 100 things than it is to keep track of 5% of 1,000 things. Like suddenly your
agree.
work is much
You
more
do have to
strenuous.
sift through more stuff. And I definitely did feel that at Gen Con this year. I felt like I spent more time looking at things than being like, ooh, you know, because like it used to be we would just go to indie games and just take one of everything and then move on down the line.
But to be fair, some of it was like, oh, well, we already have 50 of these 60 things.
Yeah, but I agree. But I think it's one of those things that there are more coming out. And now I will admit I am being more choosy about what I'm buying, I guess, in terms of those style of games. Because I don't think we're the average RPG customer. Do you know what I'm saying? Because we buy...
Well, I find that the same thing about like the story and setting that I find difficult. I also find with system, right? Because now everybody's putting out their own RPG product, and each thing has its own system. And like I'm really loving all these people that are just using Powered by the Apocalypse to make their game because I already know what I'm supposed to do.
Okay, so let me. That's actually where I was kind of thinking this would go next, and. You specifically mentioned Powered by the Apocalypse, and we play loads of those games.
Right.
We have lots of them. Lots of Powered by the Apocalypse games. We play lots of different ones of them, okay? Do you feel the same feeling about system that you do in that we've played lots of different Powered by the Apocalypse games that you do about things being uninspired? Do you feel like it's the easy way out because they're making Powered by the Apocalypse games, or do you feel the exact opposite?
I don't feel that about it at all because math is not something that gives you a feeling. Like it just is.
Okay.
So when you're talking about like percentiles and your mischance versus success chance, that's just math. Like that's all that is. And
right.
I don't need you to give me different math to do. Now, are some systems better for certain things than others? Sure. I mean, but I feel like, you know, you've got the fate system. You've got a general D10 system. You've got all your D20 systems, and you have like this Powered by the Apocalypse world system. So unless you're doing something so very novel and easy to navigate and like system is what you're really passionate about, then
right.
by all means, you know, make your own system. But otherwise, there are plenty of perfectly adequate systems out there that you could use to tell me a novel story, and I don't have to learn something new in order to be able to delve into that, I guess. But I mean, I'm one of those people that's more about story than they are about the dice roll anyway.
Right.
So maybe I'm not the best. If you're somebody that really loves the dice rolling and the crunch, maybe you're more concerned about that. But for me, it's so many of these people that make these, that manufacture these RPGs have already said, hey, here's this, and feel free to utilize the system we currently have in order to put it in in order to put it into the game. So why not just do that? Just save yourself some work and make up a good story and a good plot and put the effort there instead.
I don't disagree with you. I think that we, specifically relating to Powered by the Apocalypse, right? I think that it does a few things very, very well. But I don't think that every game needs to be put into Powered by the Apocalypse.
No, I completely agree. But for those games that don't need to be put into it, there's also the Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is basically just a distilled version of D&D. Or there's a D10 system that they're currently using in White Wolf, or which is very similar to the system that you're using in Genesis. I mean, it's almost identical, really.
It's a dice pool system with a target number. Yeah.
And it's D10s. I don't see a need to go any further than that, really.
Fair enough.
I don't know if that's entirely on the topic of what we were already talking about.
Well, no, I think we kind of rambled all over the place a little bit, but that's not necessarily bad.
Let me ask you then. So, have you played in a Star Wars RPG?
Yes, I have.
Did you enjoy it?
Um,
It's a loaded question.
well, I did for a time.
Okay, and I know that you've played in a Firefly RPG,
Uh-huh.
right? Did you enjoy that?
For a time.
Okay. Do you feel like the time was similar? Like, did you enjoy both to the same extent for the same length of time? Or did one seem to have more playability to you than the other?
That's actually a really cool, interesting question. Huh. Well, let me say this. I've played several different Star Wars RPGs.
Okay.
Like games, right? In both system, and like I played West End D6 Star Wars and D20 Star Wars, okay? And what I will say is that world is much bigger, and it's kind of a weird thing to say, because there are more stories to tell. When you play Firefly, you're expecting to play Western style sci-fi, right?
Why is that a smaller world than Star Wars?
Because the genre, physically, the universe is infinite, blah, 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 whatever, right?
Right.
But in terms of what Firefly is, that is a narrower world than Star Wars.
Why?
Because no one wants to play the Alliance.
But nobody, I mean,
We did play an Empire game, and it was fun. We were
I guess.
terribly bad people.
But
no,
it's almost the exact same Alliance, Rebellion,
I don't disagree.
Empire, Rebellion. It's the same.
But when you sit down to play Firefly, though, that story is about the Western frontier of sci-fi, right? That kind of weird mashup of genres, right? And
It's the Star Trek theme. It's, to go where no man has gone before.
but it's different than that because they're terraforming and all this kind of stuff, and you're on the frontier, okay, in a different kind of way than Star Trek is, because Star Trek is just not. It's like the exact opposite. Like everything's clean and sanitized, whereas in Firefly, it's not.
Okay. All right. I can see that.
Now, when you say, let's play a Firefly game, that's where my mind goes, okay, is Star Frontier kind of thing, right? When you say, let's play a Star Wars game, while the Alliance and the Empire are very similar in a lot of ways, I don't want to play Alliance when you say Firefly. I want to play Serenity.
Okay.
But when you say, let's play Star Wars, I'm like, ooh, what are we going to do? We could play Jedi, we could play pilots, we could play Empire, And now what I will say, though, is I feel like there are more styles of games that are going to be played in a Star Wars universe than there are in Firefly. But that's because baggage that we bring, okay? But I think
like how you say we, but I completely disagree with you.
we
entirely.
as in most gamers, okay? But I think that when you talk about how long I enjoyed those games for, I think I would say that I enjoyed those games for about the same amount of time. I played a game where we were rebels and had some Jedi in the group, like your classic Star Wars game, right? Had fun, enjoyed it, played through it. And I would say that I enjoyed that about as long as I enjoyed our Serenity game. And I really enjoyed both of those games, We played an Empire game where we worked for the Empire and we went around and we're the boot heel of the Empire. That went on probably about the same amount of time. I think it's just I have a time limit on the sci-fi games that I enjoy playing. Because sci-fi is kind of this thing that's cool, and then you do what you do, and then it kind of starts to trail off. And then you're repeating the same ideas, which kind of gets back to what we were talking to originally, was that at that point I think you just cut it off and say, let's do something new. Instead of trying to find a way to rehash it and do something that's pseudo-original.
Okay. I don't know where I was going after that. I was just curious to see if it, had more to do with the world that you identified with more as far as experience
So
or
along those
general interest as opposed to originality.
along those
Does that
same
make sense?
lines, feel the Cthulhu universe is very similar. Okay, and most of the Cthulhu games that we have here, I have ran. So let me ask you, going along the same lines of that, how I kind of start to lose interest in those games because the story has been told in a way. Do you feel like the same thing happens with the Cthulhu style, the Lovecraftian games that we run here, where they sort of run their course and need to be a new game started as opposed to the same one continuing on?
Well, Cthulhu games are sort of self-limiting
Right.
because they're just a harsher system. So you should be either dying or going crazy and then making new characters. And I think that is probably not something I would want to do all the time either, right? Because occasionally you want to live and like not be crazy. Like occasionally you want to be epic, you want to be heroic. You don't want to be like noir, never learning anything, dying and going insane.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, though, because being heroic and doing those big things is very much Dungeons and Dragons. And while I love LOTFP, that is not big and heroic.
Sometimes it is.
Come on.
Like you can succeed in that world.
I'm not saying that you can't succeed. It is not big and heroic.
It could be.
No.
No?
No.
Never?
No.
Ever?
Well, consider this. Once you get to 10th level, your hit points cap out, and you start to just get your con bonus and don't get an additional hit die.
Maybe I haven't played long enough.
You're right. Well, nobody survives long enough. That's the other thing, right? So everybody dies. There is a certain mortality in those old school games that they describe it as this funnel, right? The reason you enjoy playing your 5th level characters because you had to play 1,000 0 level characters before you got to the 5th level one, right? And I very much agree with that, but that is not big and heroic. It's just not. It's gritty and grim. It's like Warhammer gritty and grim. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Huh. I don't know. I mean, I guess to answer your question, no, I don't want to play Cthulhu all the time. I don't want to play any one thing all the time. Sometimes I want to be just an epic barbarian, and sometimes I want to be a pulpy librarian that's solving the world's problems through research, and sometimes I want to be a kid in the 1980s that's finding weird shit that their parents don't believe.
So let me,
and I think that's probably like just what frustrates me is that I don't want to play the same game, and I don't want you to manufacture the same game because I don't want to play the same game every time. I want you to give me something different. I want you to give me the next thing that I'm really going to love.
So I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, which I feel like I already know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to think about what my answer is going to be, and then I'm going to change it.
So is the problem a question of originality, or is it a problem of inspiration in terms of the games that are coming out?
I don't think it's ever an inspiration problem. I think there's enough inspiration out there between the real world and art and music and literature and other RPGs and what have you, that there should never be an inspiration problem. If there's an inspiration problem, then you probably just need to go somewhere else and see something different.
Hang on. Let me back it up then. What I'm asking you is when you look at these products, okay, and I'm not saying that the creators aren't inspired, because if they weren't inspired, they wouldn't make it very clearly, right? What I'm saying is when you look at something, is the problem in your mind coming from a place that when you look at something and you see it, that's not original, or it doesn't inspire you?
I don't know that I can ever really like answer that question.
What do you mean?
Well, you're asking me like, is the problem with me? And I don't know that I can ever see outside myself enough to be able to say,
no. What I'm saying
like,
is,
no, the problem is most definitely with you.
Back up. What I'm saying is when you look at a game,
right,
is the problem that you're not seeing this game as it is original, or is the problem that you're looking at a game and saying that this game doesn't inspire me?
And no, the problem is that the game is not original. The problem is that I've seen basically the exact same game 5 different ways, and maybe you have a slightly different system, and maybe you have some kind of, it's the same problem with an M. Night Shyamalan movie, right? Like, okay, so this may be a completely different movie, but the twist at the end is the same. So,
okay.
I don't know.
I'm thinking of the most recent game that I walked by and was like, holy crap, I've got to have this game.
Okay.
Right? And
What was it? Oh, it's the Genesis. Yeah,
easily, right?
sure.
I walked past it. I saw the artwork for it and was like, now granted, I love World War One stuff. I think it's a cool time period. You know,
And it's heavily inspired by those things, but it presents you with a different idea. So if they had said, okay, here's this artwork and here's the great thing and here's the pitch, and it was basically just a game set in World War One where you were battling, let's say it was Dust, right? But it was like World War One instead of World War Two. Would you still have been excited to buy that game?
I bought Dust and was excited.
But it was Dust. I'm saying if this game,
Right.
Dust is already a thing.
Right.
Now this game is is World War One inspired art pasted on top of the same idea. Would you still want it? No, you wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't.
Hang on.
I'm sorry.
I'm considering. No, I'm really honestly considering it because when I first saw the game, when I first saw the Genesis, it was the guy with the Kaiser helm with the spike on top of it, you know.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, holy crap, what is this? I got to look at it." And
But that's just what initially pulled you in. Like, what was it about it after
Here
that
you go.
that made you
If
actually buy the game?
if I'm going to be totally honest, had I seen it, and I would agree, Dust World War One. There's a lot of Dust World War Two, right? The Genesis, a lot of kind of that World War One influence and that kind of iconography and the way it looks. Knowing me, I would have still bought it. Yes, if it was just straightforward World War One, right? But let me explain to you why. Okay, to most people, they probably look at World War One and World War Two and they see that they're pretty similar. They would think, right? But they're drastically different. Okay, in terms of, without going down a huge rabbit hole, warfare tools, machinery, it's all way drastically different. Cavalry still exists, doesn't, all this kind of stuff. But I don't know that I'm the right person to answer this question for what you're going for, because I will buy games that I think are inspired and cool, regardless of how similar it is to something I already have, because I want to support people that are producing games that are cool and inspired. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but can you really call it inspired if it's the exact same thing, just regurgitated slightly differently?
Yes and no. I think that there was...
Maybe I'm not seeing the subtleties enough. Maybe World War One and World War Two are too much the same to me because I don't
Then that's
like
entirely
history.
possible because it's not your interest. But like in terms of when I look at it and I look at the artwork, right? The artwork differences between the Genesis and Dust are huge.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it's inspired in a different kind of a way. Bluebeard's Bride is another good one to look at. We've talked about that game to death. And the way that game looks and the stories you tell, I was like, there is nothing like this. Now, that one's original and inspired. So it's maybe an example of both. But
that's what, I want to see more games like that and less of the same game again and again and again and again.
I agree with that.
And
but
you can't, I don't know. I don't know if I can find a good way to so we played Blood in the Chocolate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the idea of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But it's not the same story told to me again. Things are different. Things are changed. It is a very similar story. You can identify those themes, but things are changed in such a way that I find the story to still be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, another one to reference for Lamentations is that Cursed Chateau. If I'm remembering correctly, the original Cursed Chateau was the similar adventure, but it had the D&D tropes where instead of it being like this ghost and whatever, it was like an ogre magi and all this other kind of stuff. And it's that, but put through a different lens and improved, in my opinion, to make something much more better. Much more better. Yeah, I just said that. That's okay. We'll leave that one in there. You guys can all laugh at me. It's okay. But so I don't know. I guess where I come from, I agree with you in some respects that there are fantasy being a great example of it, and I think it's teetering in that area with the 80s fiction kind of a storyline. But I think that will peter out faster because it's not as big as fantasy. But at the same time, I really like Lamentations, which is just, it's not original, but it's super inspired. And I realize inspired and original kind of walk hand in hand sometimes because, well, look at Blood and the Chocolate. That's a great example of it, right? That
I feel
wasn't
like it's not original. The system is not original.
No.
But it's definitely distinctly its own thing.
Well, yeah. But that's where I'm coming down, like this inspired thing. Like, I don't need it to be brand new for me. I just need it to be inspired, because I feel like if it's if like the person produces it, right? If they find it compelling, and so compelling, in fact, that they do a good job producing it, that's what grabs me. So the Red and Pleasant Land is another great one. There have been so many regurgitations of the Alice in Wonderland thing that it's tired, and to be honest, when I saw it, I was like, I don't even know that I want to buy this, because I've been disappointed so many times, right? But when I got that, I love that book. That is a great book. I've never even ran it, but I love that, and I would buy it again, because it's and I may never use that book in terms of a gaming sense, but it's so cool and inspired and different, and original may not be the best word for it, because it's original in its own way, because it's inspired by Alice in Wonderland. It takes a lot, it draws from that a lot, but it does it in a interesting, compelling and way that is original and kind of like in its own way.
Well, I think that's what I'm getting at, like the difference between using something as inspiration and just retelling the same story.
Churning out the same stuff.
Right. That's the key difference. Like, take it, use it, build on it, add your own flair to it, but don't regurgitate the same thing to me.
Perhaps you should have made the Red and Pleasant Land reference earlier. No, I agree. I think that's probably where I come down as well. And it maybe we didn't do the best job of articulating that, but that Red and Pleasant Land and Blood and the Chocolate are probably two of the strongest examples of it, because they draw inspiration from two very classic things.
Yeah. Well, Dust is a great example of it too, because you essentially just have the World War II story, but you've taken it and you've changed it into something else. You've added this sort of like pulp feel to it, and then you've added some sort of like mad science, like Hellboy stuff in there, and you've shoved that all together, and you've given me something new and exciting and something that I can enjoy.
I think that's exactly it right there. So you've taken something that was conventional, something that everyone knows, and you've added enough to it and twisted it enough to make it distinctly its own thing.
Yes.
Very good. Well, there you go. All righty. Well, do you think there's anything else to say about that? I mean, we took a long time to get to that point, but...
No, I feel like I've made my point now.
Right on. Okay, with all of this, I want to finish on something that might actually be usable to someone. Okay, so taking all of what we said before, do you think that you can apply that same logic to the games that you run? And how do you do it without being cliche? Because I feel like if you take some original or some classic ideas, right, and you twist them to try and make them original, you really run the razor's edge of being like hokey and terrible. Like, because there are certain mashups that just should not happen.
I don't know, because like, I've really enjoyed running in some games that are very stereotypical. This is what you expect, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's fun. But I think the games that I've enjoyed where that is a thing, it's hitting the plot points that you expect in a way that's maybe a little thematically different. So if you're going to...
Can you give me an example?
I didn't play in this game, right? But I ran a Fate children's game for you guys. And the entire plot of that game was rescuing your friends through a siege on the wizard's tower. And there is nothing that is more stereotypical fantasy than laying siege to the wizard's tower.
Okay.
But it was set in this, you guys were kids instead of adults, and it was very much a fairy tale backdrop, but it was set on this classic theme. And I feel like that's okay. Everybody knows what you're supposed to do in that setting, right. And it's very much exactly what you expect.
Right.
But everybody had a good time and found that game to be enjoyable because the setting was slightly different. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think you can add flavor in that way in making the plot points, the plot is the same and the setting is different, or the setting is the same and the plot is completely different. But you cannot give me the same setting and the same plot. Mm. So I'll play in your Firefly world all day, but I'm not going to play, Saffron marrying Captain Reynolds or whatever. Like,
Well,
I don't want to. I want to
okay,
play
hang
in
on,
that
hang on.
world,
But
but I
you-
don't want to
no.
play that episode.
Hang on. Did you enjoy the Firefly game that we had?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and I would agree with that. I think everybody at the table had a great time with that game. But that game was exactly what you would expect from a Firefly game.
I thought it was. I didn't think
Now-
I was playing the same
Now,
game.
to be fair, that was the first Firefly game we've ever really played.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a little bit of leeway there. And we weren't playing through the exact episodes of Firefly, obviously.
Right.
But thematically, it was Firefly.
Right. The theme was the same, but the plot was different.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. Your
Right.
theme can be the same and your plot can be different, or your plot can be the same and the theme can be different. But you can't have the same theme and the same plot. That doesn't work.
Okay, fair enough. I just think in terms of the Firefly game, it's a very specific universe, and I say this,
But I feel the same way about Star Wars. That's why I won't play in that RPG.
Right.
Because I haven't read any of those books. I've only seen the movies, and to me, it's always exactly the same. And I don't want to be involved.
I don't disagree with you, but what I'm saying though is, and I say this acknowledging the fact that I enjoyed the Firefly game very much. Okay, but fundamentally, we were doing exactly what your problem is with Star Wars, is that we were playing the same essential missions, slightly tweaked, of Firefly, because it's not that big of a world. Like, there are certain things that you expect. Now, I will say, to be fair, if you asked me to play another Firefly game, I'd be very hesitant to, because I already played that game. It was fun. I had a great time. But there's only, I don't want to play those same style adventures. And that's what it is. That's what that game is. It almost gets a pass because it was the first time.
Right. Like, then that's why I asked you about it earlier.
Yeah. So,
I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. You're talking to me. To me, that's what it is. You have to have the same. You have to have the same theme in a different plot, or you have to have the same plot in a different theme, or both entirely original. But if you're going to be stealing material and playing an established IP, that's it for me. That's what makes the difference. If you want to run a game, then do that, but don't try and take the exact like. We all have a certain amount of baggage going into the things that we love, right?
right.
So maybe you watched Firefly and you really loved Firefly. And that's cool. But then going into the game, that's too much to try and take into something. So you can't set that up. You can't say, okay, you're going to be Wash and you're going to be Inara and you're going to be
Right.
You can't do that, because you're setting yourself up for disappointment that way. You have to be in love with the thing enough to change it and experience it from a different view.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to run those games in general, the person running them has to really not just love the world, they have to be really committed to it. We talked about this the other day, about running a game. And I like the Lord of the Rings movie and I like the setting and stuff, but I could never run a One Ring game because I'm not dedicated to it in the same way that Kurt is.
No,
I can't, I'm not dedicated to it enough to remember the names of all these cities and where they are in relation to each other and all the different NPCs that are involved in that and keeping track of them. You have to like it that much if you're going to run in that established world, to be able to keep track of all those things in your head and make them relevant to what's going on in your game. You have to take it like one step farther.
Right. All right, I think we're going to draw this one to a close. I don't know that you entirely agree with us or not, but if you do or don't, let us know. Actually, drop us a line and see what you think. Hopefully you got something useful out of this. I know we just kind of vented and went back and forth here, but let us know what you think of what you guys are tired of and seeing in RPGs or would like to see more of. And that goes, I guess, both in terms of systems and in terms of themes and plots and genres and all that kind of stuff. And let us know what you guys think, because I'm always interested to see what other gamers are doing and experiencing, because sort of leads me into playing other games and exploring new things. And yeah, it'd be nice to hear from you guys and see what you guys think and what you're doing and ways that you guys keep your table from getting stale in terms of stories and systems and mechanics and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, right on. Well, hopefully you got something interesting out of that. I know we kind of rambled on for about an hour there, but maybe you can apply some of what we're talking about to your table and use it in a way that so your players aren't seeing the same storylines and same plots and tropes, and then draw on some new themes and some originality to challenge your players in different ways, which is really what we kind of come back to in almost everything that we talk about here on this podcast, really, is challenging your players in new and different ways. And pushing the envelope is such a cliche thing to say, but really that's what it comes back to, though, like getting more of them, because I don't know, it's kind of silly to say, but I like to watch movies I like to watch horror movies, right? And I don't want to watch the same ones. I want to watch ones that are scarier in different ways and push different buttons. And, do you know what I mean?
It's actually a perfect segue into this.
Oh, right on. Well, perfect. I didn't even know we meant to do that. But, so I guess what I'm saying is just try and find some new ways to challenge them and be inspired and do some original things. And hopefully this will do that for you. But if not, I guess we suck and, well, whatever. So, but as you guys know, we're a member of the Gonna Geek network of shows. So Lacey has a quick promo for one of them that actually, strangely enough, segues into something that I was talking about.
Yeah. So speaking of remakes, right? So that's a hot topic issue in the geeky world right now. What with, Thor, this and that, and we're remaking all of these wonderful things, and really Stranger Things is like just a remake of our childhood. So the All Things Good and Nerdy Network number 287, they're calling And They're All Delicious, which is a really wonderful title. Anyways, so Naki opens the show by calling out Anthony for dislike of the movie It. Well, Chris and Willie talk about the Star Wars Battlefront 2 gaming experience and the controversy surrounding the game's loot boxes and microtransactions. So to wrap things up, Anthony geeks out over a possible multiple man coming to the big screen. So I don't know. I just thought it was a good transition because the remake of the movie It and the feelings surrounding that. But as far as I've heard, everybody seems to think that the remake is much actually probably better than the first movie.
Fair enough. I don't know. I haven't seen it. So right on. So that was
All Things Good and Nerdy from the Gonna Geek Network.
Right on. Right on. Well, to draw things to a close, as you guys know, we mentioned it before in the announcements. We are on Patreon at patreon.com/justonemorefix. You can join us there and support us and help support the show and get some additional content with raw audio feeds and pre-show and post-show stuff, as well as some new awesome content where we're going to be releasing to you guys some game aids and the things that we produce and the games that we run that'll be coming out soon. So check that out and join us there and support us if you like.
Go check out my Dread game. Yeah.
Right on. And as always, you can find us at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justomorefix. Check out our Facebook group on Facebook as well. That's kind of redundant to say on Facebook at Facebook, but whatever.
Apparently redundancy is what we do here.
That is very true. Very true.
The whole theme of the episode.
That whole outro was neither original nor inspired. Sad day. Wah. Anyway, I think that'll do it for us this week. And
we'll see you next week.
As always, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at justonemorefix.